in Mago Reddit. Today's story is
My family threw a wedding in Hawaii without inviting me, and 3 months later they lost everything. I discovered the shocking truth behind their desperate call. All my life had revolved around studying, sacrificing, and existing silently in the background while my older sister bathed in the golden light of our parents' love. They adored her, calling her their pride and joy, while I was an afterthought, someone they expected to achieve only to secure their future. It was not a role I had chosen, but one I accepted because there seemed to be no other option. One night, after hours immersed in textbooks and class notes, I was completely exhausted. My small room in the student residence felt more suffocating than ever. The dim light barely relieved the weight of my loneliness. Looking for a moment of distraction, I opened my phone and idly browsed through social media. Then I saw it. The post hit me like a punch in the stomach. There she was, my sister, resplendent in an elegant dress, surrounded by smiling faces at her engagement party. The text below the image made my heart sink. I can't wait to celebrate our wedding in Hawaii with all our loved ones. Apparently, all her loved ones did not include me. I stared at the image hoping I had misinterpreted it. Was this some kind of joke? But no, my parents were proudly by her side, dressed in their best, beaming as if they had won the lottery. Relatives I hadn't seen in years filled the frame, laughing and toasting with glasses of champagne. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. A cold numbness spread through my body, quickly followed by a sharp, burning pain in my chest. They didn't even think to tell me. My sister had always treated me like a stranger, but I didn't expect her to even bother sending a simple message. My parents, the same ones who continually instilled in me the importance of family, didn't consider it necessary to include me in one of the most significant moments of their lives. My memories came back uninvited and unforgiving. Summers working 2 part-time jobs so they wouldn't have to worry about the bills. Giving up nights out with friends to study because failing was not an option. I had to make them proud. Enduring lectures about how my future success was the family's retirement plan. Every sacrifice I made was for them, for this family. Yet, when it really mattered, I was invisible. Tears came without warning, clouding my vision as I stared at the screen. I wasn't the type to cry, not anymore. Years of keeping my emotions bottled up had made me a master at hiding my pain, but this cut deeper than I thought possible. I wiped my face and tried to compose myself. My first instinct was to call my parents and demand an explanation. I needed to hear them say why I didn't matter enough to be part of this celebration. With trembling hands I dialed their number, voicemail. I tried again, still voicemail. Understanding hit me like a second wave. They weren't just indifferent. They didn't even care enough to answer. My throat tightened. My breathing became heavy as I tried not to cry. I couldn't bring myself to call my sister. What would be the point? She would either ignore me or, even worse, give me some half-baked excuse that would only add insult to injury. I dropped my phone on my desk and stared at the wall. The silence felt suffocating and oppressive. I had to face the harsh truth that I had always avoided. I was expendable to them. 2 days passed before the first notification from my parents arrived, a cheerful message to don't forget to study hard. I felt something inside me break. My thumb hovered over the mute button for a moment before I pressed it, silencing their number. Then I did the same to my sister. I didn't care about their excuses or apologies, if they even planned to offer any. The pain was too intense and I couldn't bear the thought of listening to them dismiss my feelings once again. All I had ever wanted was to feel like I belonged in my own family, but now it was clear that I had never really had one. That night, as I sat in my dorm room, I felt completely abandoned. They could have pushed me aside, but I wasn't going to let them keep hurting me. If they didn't need me in their lives, maybe it was time I stopped needing them in mine. Update 1. The silence continued as I ignored their calls. Days turned into weeks and my inbox overflowed with their messages. At first, their tone was calm, almost sweet, as if nothing had happened. They wanted to know why I hadn't returned their calls, why I was so quiet. My mother mentioned how worried they were and hoped I wasn't stressing too much about the exams, but this performance of concern quickly gave way to passive-aggressive comments. My mother's voice, now more sharp, began to insinuate that I was being ungrateful. She listed everything they had done for me. How they supported me during university, the roof over my head, the meals they provided. My father intervened in another message, accusing me of being selfish and dramatic for not appreciating the sacrifices we have made for you. Their carefully crafted manipulation to generate guilt was not new to me, but hearing it now, when I was already in pain, was unbearable. Her disappointment soon intensified into anger. My mother's tone hardened as she accused me of being disrespectful, saying that after all they had done for me, the least I could do was be a good son and return her calls. My father's messages were stronger and more aggressive. He ranted about how I was wasting time on drama instead of focusing on my studies and future. He called me ungrateful, a disappointment. I deleted each message without listening to them all. His words cut deep. But I couldn't bear to hear how they twisted everything to make themselves out to be the victims. I had sacrificed so much for their approval, my time, my energy, my happiness, and now they painted me as the villain. The breaking point came the following week when my cousin got in touch. We weren't close, but I didn't expect to hear from her. I knew she'd been at the engagement party. Her name had been on the endless tags on my sister's glittering social media posts. She sounded doubtful, almost nervous, when she asked me why I hadn't been at the party. I told her I hadn't even been invited. I could hear the barely contained anger in my voice. There was a pause on the line before she spoke again, her voice cautious as if she wasn't sure whether she should say what she was about to say. She told me that she had overheard my parents talking about me at the party. Not only did they know that I was free that weekend, but they had actively decided not to invite me. Their reasoning: I needed to keep concentrating on my studies so that I could secure a well-paid job and eventually repay the family for their efforts. Her words hit me like a punch in the stomach. I had spent years sacrificing everything to meet their impossible expectations. Always hoping that one day they would see my worth, and yet here they were, treating me like an investment rather than a child. What had I done to deserve such treatment? I didn't skip parties. I refused outings with friends just to make them proud, but my cousin wasn't finished. She hesitated again before telling me that she had heard from her parents that the wedding in Hawaii was not just a waste. It was a financial catastrophe waiting to happen. My parents had emptied all their retirement savings and had mortgaged their house for the second time to finance it. At the engagement party, my father had even joked with his guests about how I was too busy being a bookworm to join them. I felt sick. The image of my father casually making fun of me in front of a crowd of smiling faces, surrounded by people who didn't care enough to question my absence. It was more than I could bear. The betrayal went deeper than I had ever imagined. That night I sat in my dorm room staring at my laptop screen. My chest felt tight as I typed a message to my parents. Each keystroke fueled by years of pent-up pain and anger. I didn't hold back. I reminded them of all the sacrifices I had made to meet their expectations. I wrote about the summers I spent working instead of enjoying my youth, the nights I stayed up studying while they turned their attention to my sister, and the countless times I put my own needs aside to make their lives easier. I asked them how they could justify excluding me from such an important family milestone. Did they ever stop to consider how their decisions affected me? Or was I nothing more than a tool to them? A means to an end? The message was not a plea for reconciliation. It was a demand for accountability. I needed them to understand the depth of the pain they had caused, even if they never apologized for it. When I sent it, I didn't feel very well. Part of me hoped they would finally see the error of their ways, but a bigger part knew better. Days passed without a reply. The silence didn't surprise me, but it still hurt. Then one morning, a message from them appeared in my inbox. I hesitated before opening it, but as I read their words, my chest tightened with a different kind of pain. The message was as cold and contemptuous as I feared. They accused me of being ungrateful and selfish, throwing back in their faces everything they had done for me. My father wrote that I needed to stop playing the victim and concentrate on my studies. My mother added a final stab by reminding me that family obligations entail sacrifices, and that I needed to grow up and stop acting like a child. I reread the message several times. Each word confirmed what I had always known, but never wanted to admit. They didn't see me as a person. To them I was a project, an investment, a tool for their comfort and convenience. They accused me of being ungrateful and selfish, and of repaying them for everything they had done for me. They said I should be concentrating on my studies instead of complaining about a party. Teary eyes did not come this time. Instead, a strange calm came over me, the kind that comes with purpose. I realized then that I didn't need his approval, his validation, or his love, not if it came with conditions that made me feel invisible and unworthy. You're right. I should choose me. I closed my laptop. Let them pour their time and money into my sister. Let them reap the rewards of their golden daughter. Why should I care? Update 2. Anger burned in me for days after their derogatory message. Every word they wrote was repeated in my mind, each sentence more insulting than the last. They had twisted my heart into some ridiculous narrative of ingratitude. I wasn't ungrateful. I was tired. Tired of always giving, always sacrificing and receiving nothing but contempt in return. The weight of their manipulation crushed me, but this time it didn't paralyze me, it fueled me. I couldn't keep swallowing their behavior, expecting the least bit of love and respect. They had made it clear where I stood in their lives and I was ready to accept it on my terms, not theirs. Late one night I opened my laptop again and this time there was no hesitation. I responded, each word sharp and deliberate. I began by reminding them that whatever sacrifices they thought they had made for me, they were only fulfilling the basic duties of parenthood. Providing food, shelter, and education was not a favor. It was an obligation they assumed when they decided to have children. I pointed out that, unlike my sister, I had not depended on their financial support for years. I had gotten a scholarship to cover my tuition. I worked part-time jobs to manage my expenses. I told them bluntly that I owed them absolutely nothing, then I let them know everything. I told them how deeply I had been hurt by their exclusion from the engagement party and wedding plans. Not only the act itself, but the calculated choice to leave me out, along with their casual jokes about me at the party, was proof that they didn't care about me beyond what I could provide for them. I asked them if their golden daughter with her lavish wedding and elegant parties would now be responsible for their retirement, since they had emptied their savings and taken on debts to finance her happiness. And finally, I ended it cleanly. I told them that since I was over 18, capable of living independently, I saw no reason to continue with this farce of a relationship. They clearly valued my sister above all else, so they could lean on her and her new husband for everything from now on. I would no longer be their scapegoat or punching bag. I didn't press send out of desperation to receive their apology or acknowledgement. I sent it for myself. His reply arrived the following day and I couldn't bring myself to read it. I deleted it unopened, knowing it would just be more of the same, blaming and manipulation. But they weren't finished. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a call from my mother. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the reject button, but I decided to answer. Her voice was cold, barely concealing her annoyance. She launched into a monologue about how disappointed they were in me, how they couldn't believe I would abandon my family for something so trivial. She insisted that the wedding wasn't about me, so I had no right to feel left out. I interrupted her, saying that she was completely missing the point. It wasn't just the wedding, it was everything. Years of being overlooked, dismissed, and treated as an afterthought. I asked her how she would feel if the roles were reversed, if I had excluded her from something so important without thinking twice. Her response was as predictable as it was irritating. She said I was being dramatic, that I had no reason to make such a fuss about this. According to her, I was letting my emotions cloud my judgment. The anger I had been holding interrupted. I told her my emotions weren't the problem. Her complete lack of responsibility was. I said I had spent my whole life trying to live up to her impossible expectations, sacrificing my happiness for her approval. And now it was over. She tried to interrupt, but I wouldn't let her. I told her if she wanted to keep playing favorites, she could do it without me in her life. Her tone turned icy. She accused me of being selfish, of throwing my family away because of a misunderstanding. I laughed bitterly, telling her that the only misunderstanding here was her belief that I would tolerate her behavior any longer. I hung up before she could reply. Not even 5 minutes had passed when my phone rang again. This time it was my father. His tone was harsh and more confrontational. He accused me of being ungrateful and disrespectful, of dishonoring the family. I matched his tone and told him that respect is earned, not demanded. I reminded him of all the sacrifices he had made for the family, sacrifices that went unrecognized while my sister was showered with praise for doing the bare minimum. His response was to deflect, as always. He said that life wasn't fair and that I needed to toughen up. He claimed that the wedding wasn't about me and that I needed to rise above myself. That was the last straw. I told him that I was done trying to earn his approval and that he could save his lectures for someone who actually cared. Then I hung up. I thought it was over, but my sister decided to get involved. She called me later that night, her voice dripping with fake concern. She said she didn't understand why I was so upset and that she had assumed I wouldn't care about the wedding since I was so busy with school. I couldn't contain my frustration. I told her that her assumption was just another example of how little she and the rest of the family valued me. I told her that I was a lazy, spoiled brat who had never worked for anything in my life. I told her that I owed our parents for everything they had given me, including their engagement party and wedding, and that she'd better get her act together when they came asking for help in their old age. His tone changed, becoming defensive. He accused me of being jealous and trying to ruin his happiness. I laughed as I spoke, telling him he didn't need to ruin anything. She and our parents were doing a good job on their own. Before he could reply, I hung up. I felt free. Free from their expectations, their manipulation, and their constant reminders of my supposed inadequacy. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. I had spent my whole life chasing something they were never willing to give, and now I was finally ready to stop running. They had made their decision and now I was making mine. Update 3. The constant feeling that I was never enough and that my achievements were never celebrated was being replaced by peace. I had started my internship at a prestigious company, one of the connections that my teachers had helped me to make. The work wasn't easy, but I was thriving. I felt that I was being recognized for something I did on my own, not for my family or the image they tried to impose on me. They had even expressed an interest in giving me a full-time job, which felt like a big leap forward. It wasn't the golden opportunity I dreamed of as a child, but I had earned it, and that made all the difference. I kept my distance from my parents, from my sister. I knew they would keep trying to draw me back into their world of expectations, manipulation and blame. I refused to give them the power to make me feel small again. If they couldn't respect me when I was struggling, they had no right to have me around when I was succeeding. I deleted their numbers and blocked their profiles. It was over. Then one afternoon I ran into an old family friend in a cafe. I wasn't expecting to see anyone I knew, but there she was. Anne. One of my mother's closest friends. She recognized me immediately and asked how I was getting on. We started with small talk and she asked me how school was going, how my family was. I gave the usual answers, keeping things on a superficial level. But when she asked about my parents, I knew something was wrong. She leaned in a little closer as if she didn't want anyone else listening, and told me that things weren't going very well for them. My father had lost his job, she said. I didn't know the exact details, but it seemed that he was struggling to find something else that paid enough to keep up with his bills. She mentioned that my mother was working herself to the bone, but it wasn't enough. The situation was serious. It hurt more than I wanted to admit, but I tried to keep a neutral face. Anne continued, her voice dropping as she shared how my parents' debts were piling up. The wedding in Hawaii, everything my parents had sacrificed for, had been a financial disaster. Their savings had gone up in smoke and they were facing the consequences. I already knew they had put everything into that wedding, but hearing it confirmed by someone else made it feel more real. They had spent their last penny to make my sister's wedding a fairy tale while I was fending for myself. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the priorities they had chosen. They didn't care about me, not really. I tried to keep my cool, asking after my mother's health, pretending I didn't already know how bad things had gotten, but Anne was too caught up in the gossip to notice. She said she hoped my parents would work it out, but it was hard to see how they could when they were drowning in debt. As I walked away, I felt that rush of satisfaction again, followed by something else, something darker. I wasn't happy that they were fighting, but I couldn't lie to myself either. They had pushed me to the side for years, always demanding that I excel but never giving me the support I needed. Now they had sacrificed everything for a wedding that didn't even matter in the long run. Everything was falling apart around them. A few days later I received a text message from my mother. It was a new number and she said we needed to talk. She told me that my father was having trouble finding work and they needed my help. She reminded me of everything they had done for me, the sacrifices they made so that I could succeed, and now they needed me to come back and support them. I didn't reply. My fingers hovered over the keyboard ready to type something sarcastic or angry, but I didn't. Instead, I simply deleted the message. I had nothing to say to him. He had never understood the sacrifices I had made, and now he expected me to just drop everything and save them. I wasn't going to be their safety net anymore. A few days later I ran into a cousin, someone I hadn't spoken to recently. He casually mentioned the state of affairs at home. He confirmed what I had already suspected. My sister's life was not as perfect as it seemed. Her marriage, which had been built on the pedestal of that extravagant wedding, was crumbling under the pressure. Apparently, her new husband's family were not happy with the amount of money spent on the wedding, and had begun to withdraw their support. My sister, who had always been so perfect in my parents' eyes, was facing the consequences of her choices. I couldn't help but feel a small flash of sympathy for her. But it was quickly replaced by something else. It wasn't going to be me who rescued her. She had always been the favorite daughter, always the one who received everything on a silver platter. Now she was learning what it meant to deal with the consequences of her own decisions. She had gotten everything she wanted, but now, when things didn't go according to plan, she had no one to turn to. The feeling of satisfaction I felt was not from wishing her harm, but from finally realizing that her life was not as perfect as it had been made out to be. I could see her for what she was. Update 4. I was catching up on some work one night when my phone vibrated with an unfamiliar number. At first, I hesitated, not recognizing it. Then, against my better judgment, I answered it. It was my mother. Her voice was thin and strained and I could tell something was wrong. She didn't waste time getting to the point. They had fallen on hard times, she said, and they needed my help. She mentioned how their financial situation had spiraled out of control, how the wedding had drained their savings, how my father's job loss had left them struggling. I could hear the guilt in his voice, but it didn't affect me in the way he was probably hoping. He said he hoped I had finally calmed down. My father took the line next, his tone more defensive than apologetic. He began by blaming his bad luck, how things had spiraled out of control. He said he had been working tirelessly to fix it, but nothing seemed to work. They didn't know who else to turn to. He admitted, almost begging me. I was their only hope. His words sent a wave of disgust through me. I listened for a moment, letting them talk in circles. There were no apologies, no acknowledgments. They expected me to forget everything, to overlook the betrayal just because they were now in a difficult situation. When I finally spoke, my voice was firm but colder than I had ever heard it before. The fact that they emptied their savings, mortgaged their house, and even dipped into their retirement funds for a day of luxury for my sister and her new husband. I told them how stupid they were. I couldn't believe they had thrown away their financial future for something as frivolous as a wedding. And for what? To impress people who didn't care about them. I asked them if they really thought they could afford that kind of waste, especially when they had me. The one they had ignored for years, working hard to make sure they had a future. But did they ever consider that? Of course not. I told them how incredibly selfish they were. They spent all that money, all those resources on a party that lasted a few hours. The nerve of them calling me for help now. They didn't deserve my help, not anymore, and I made that clear. My sister called later that night from her husband's number. I had assumed that another unknown number meant it was one of theirs. Her voice was different, trembling, full of guilt and despair. She was crying. She said she didn't know how things had gotten so bad, how their life had collapsed after the wedding. She begged me to forgive them, to forget the past, to just help them get back on their feet. She insisted that family comes first. I scoffed at the irony. She was asking me to pretend that everything was fine, as if the years of neglect, favoritism and exclusion had never happened. She didn't even try to understand why I was so angry. She just wanted me to bail them out, to fix everything for her, for them. Not once had she acknowledged that I was also part of this family. I told her I was interested in fixing things. The family could come first, but for too long I had been the one who came last. She spent years enjoying the spotlight, living in the bubble they built around her while I was left to fend for myself. Now, when the perfect life she had built was starting to crack, she wanted me to fix everything. He started begging me not to be so cold. I wasn't cold. I was just fed up. I reminded him how easily they had erased me from their lives when everything was going well. I wasn't going to let them back in just because they had made a mess of their own lives. I wasn't the one who built their world, and I certainly wasn't the one who tore it down, so why should I fix it? I hung up before she could say anything else. In the days that followed, I received texts, emails, calls, apologies wrapped in guilt and demands disguised as pleas for help, but I ignored them all. Let them wallow in the consequences of their actions. I didn't need them anymore. I had my own future to focus on. A future that didn't include them. The last message I received from my mother was a single line. "We're sorry, please don't abandon us." The truth is that they never really had me. And now, when they were at their lowest point, they had no one to turn to but themselves. I didn't have to say another word. They had their answer.